Welcome back to Rachel Resets. I'm so glad to see you here. We're going to be making 4 different meals today. Each meal is going to serve 2 people, so 8 servings worth of meals, and they're going to use cheap, low-cost ingredients, but high in taste and high in nutrition. First, we're going to be using 3 carrots. This comes out to $1.37. I have 4 potatoes for $1.62. I'm using 1 packet's worth of yeast, which comes out to 29 cents, 1 red onion for 52 cents, 1 bag of frozen spinach for $1.12, 1 pack of chicken breast tenders for $3.34, and then 1 stick of margarine. You can use butter, but it's a little pricier where I'm at, so 40 cents for this stick of margarine, and then 1 bag of flour for $1.16. This comes out to $9.82. I'm also going to be using a couple of spices. I tried to use basic spices, garlic powder, some seasoning salt, some oregano, salt, pepper, a little bit of thyme, some bouillon cubes, and a little bit of vegetable oil. Since we have the margarine, we won't need to use a whole lot of it. To start out with, I went ahead and prepared my carrots by peeling and then slicing them up. I cubed about half of one of the carrots, then made this 1 carrot into little carrot coins, and then I made sticks with another, about 3/4 of another carrot, and with the rest of the carrots I just ground them up by using a grater and made some finely shredded carrots. Next, I went ahead and got 2 of my potatoes peeled and cut up. We're gonna be making this into potato gnocchi. Shout out to Shelia Peters, who gave me the idea to show how to make gnocchi from scratch. This time I'm using actual potatoes. Last time I did them in the video, I used potato flakes, so you can make them from the pre-mashed potatoes and everything. You don't have to do it from real mashed potatoes, but this is how you would make them from real potatoes. I went ahead and drained off that water and mashed up my potatoes. I could add some salt here, but I didn't, just because I had already salted the water with the potatoes, and so the potatoes had already soaked up a little bit of the salt from that. Then I added in 2 cups of flour. You can add a little more flour than that if you were wanting a little more gnocchi, or you wanted the dough to be less sticky, because I did find the dough was fairly sticky, and you'll see me working at trying to make the traditional gnocchi shape with the ridges on it, and failing a few times, but I got it in the end. So you're going to go ahead and mix everything all around. Don't add water until you have really seen whether or not it needs it, because at the beginning I was wondering if it would ever come together, and it did come together. So the potato just takes a little time to incorporate. Make sure you incorporate as much as possible before you think, oh, I'm going to add a little water. So now I went ahead and got my dough, and here's my first try at trying to make the ridges. The dough was rather sticky, and so you can see it did do okay at the ridges, but I thought, okay, well, what if there's a better way? So I dipped my fork into flour and then rolled it that way, and that seemed to work slightly better, but still not great. So then I tried a 3rd time, and they say 3rd time's a charm, and it was. So this time I kind of dipped it lightly in the flour and then added the ridges, and this time it worked really awesome and made those nice rich shapes. Now this is just for looks, so it really doesn't matter a whole lot. You could literally roll them out, and I'm going to show you how to do them really quickly. You roll out a long log, and then you can either mash it with the fork so that it has the ridges, or you could just leave it plain and then just cut them, and you'll have all your gnocchi. And if you are doing this for a big family, that might be the way that you want to go, because otherwise it could take a while. And another option would be just to get the gnocchi that Dollar Tree sells for $1.25. It's quite delicious and not too difficult to use. First up, we're going to be making this easy chicken gnocchi skillet. I started out by putting about a tablespoon of the margarine into the pan, letting that start to melt, and then adding in my onions. Once my onions started to get a little bit translucent, I added in some chicken that I had cut up into pieces, Now I will put exact amounts in the description box below. I like to put the recipe written out just because, for me at least, I oftentimes look at the videos and then I go to the description box, screenshot it, and that way I can later on look back and find that recipe that I was looking for because it's in my pictures folder on my phone, instead of trying to find the video again or trying to remember which video had which recipe in it. Then I added in a little bit of salt and pepper, and I just flipped the chicken once it started to get a little bit brown on one side. Now once it starts to look like it's about cooked all the way through, you're going to want to add your gnocchi in. Don't worry about how they fall in the pan because you're going to be mixing them all around, so you don't have to like spread them out like I'm doing here. I just was doing it for fun. And then you're going to go ahead and start pan frying that gnocchi. Now, you might have heard before where you would stick the gnocchi in the pot, sort of like a pasta, and let it rise to the surface. Well, gnocchi cooks rather quickly and can actually also be just cooked in a pan like this. I then added in some spinach as well into this recipe, and that really adds a really nice pop of color. I love the look that spinach gives to everything, and it's also really healthy for you. So I went ahead and mixed that all around. I saw my gnocchi needed to cook a little bit longer, so I did add a little bit of water in just because I didn't want it to get too brown. And then I added in 1 bouillon cube as well to add some extra flavor, and my carrots. If you want your carrots a little more tender, you can add them closer to when you would have added that spinach in, and then you'll have much softer carrots. I like mine to be a little bit crisp still because I just like having a little bit of crunch in the dish. So this is what our final dish ended up looking like. As you can see, we've got a very colorful, tasty meal, and it didn't take too long, especially once we had that gnocchi finished up. And today is the day that you want something fast to cook while you're doing all the prep work for the other meals throughout the week. The gnocchi turned out really flavorful and tender and soaked up all the extra flavors in the dish. Next up, we're making these chicken packets with baked potatoes on the side. You're going to start out by getting a little bit of foil. Now I'm just filming over my stove because my kitchen's a little bit small, so don't worry about the stove's not on or putting things in a skillet or anything. I'm just using that space because it's the space I have. I went ahead and spread a little bit of margarine onto that tin foil just so the chicken wouldn't stick. Then I added on a little bit of my spinach and a little bit of my chopped up red onions. I then added 2 of the small chicken tenders on top and stuck about half of the carrots that I had chopped up into sticks on this tin foil and the other half on the other tin foil that I made for my husband as well. Now, if you're not a huge fan of cleaning dishes, then this is probably a great meal for you because it makes it really simple to clean up afterwards with just the tinfoil packets. I went ahead and sprinkled a little bit of flour on top of the chicken just to help soak up some of the extra juice and to help keep the moisture on top of the chicken. Then I added a little bit of salt and pepper and a little bit of thyme as well. All of these flavors are going to mesh together really well. I find that the sweetness and the carrots complements the chicken really well every single time. I also added a little bit of butter on top. This is going to drip down into all those veggies and just make them extra delicious and flavorful. Next, you're going to go ahead and close up your chicken packets. Don't worry about sealing them tightly. They need a little bit of room to vent, so leave some air spaces open. And you're going to go ahead and start preheating your oven to 350 degrees while you prepare your potatoes. I went ahead and stabbed my potato and then spread about a teaspoon of margarine over the outside. This is going to help it to crisp up and help the salt to stick because we're next going to use our salt shaker and shake that salt all over it. This really helps to dry out that skin so that it gets really nice and crispy while you're baking it in the oven. Next, you're going to go ahead and bake everything in the oven for about 30 minutes. You may need to take the packets off and then put the potatoes back in for a few more minutes. I found they cooked in about 45 minutes. This is how you get a restaurant style potato spread, is you cut that cross design and then press on the four corners until it opens up like that. And my grandma showed me how to do that, my special potato trick that I have. You're going to add a little pat of the margarine on top and then add some salt and pepper, and then you're going to take each chicken packet and open it up. This is what we have as the end result inside. I slid everything out onto my plate and just arranged the carrots around on either side of the chicken. This was delicious. The spinach with the chicken is so good, and the carrots add this really nice sweet flavor, and that potato was cooked to perfection. Next, we're going to make this chicken tender sandwich with some carrot coins. I'm starting out by making our buns for the sandwiches. I decided to try two different ways of making bread, which is one, and this is bread without using sugar. This is the first method that I was told to use a tablespoon of flour to make the bread rise instead of using sugar. And then for the second option, I decided to try using a little bit of carrot, the shredded carrot, in the recipe to see if the sugar from the carrot would help the bread to rise faster or better than the one with the flour. I used the same method for each of the breads, where I started out with some warm water. Then in one I added a little bit of the flour, and in one I added a little bit of the shredded carrots, mixed it around a little bit, and then added in my yeast. And then I mixed that and let it sit and bubble up just to see if the yeast reacted to the flour or if it reacted to the shredded carrots. And it definitely reacted to the shredded carrots. You can see the foam on top means that that yeast really activated because of the sugar in the carrots. Now with the flour, I really didn't see it doing anything. So I questioned whether or not it would rise at all or whether or not it had activated. I went ahead and made both breads because I wanted to see each through to the end and just see, which was better. And I was definitely surprised by the results. I then went ahead and added in the flour that I would add into each of the recipes and then mixed them up, and I added a little bit of the margarine as well instead of adding some oil. I like to add a little bit of oil into my bread recipes just because I think they turn out a little better with that. I also added in the salt. I've heard different people have told me not to add the salt at the beginning of the recipe. You want to add it towards the end when you're adding in the flour. That way the yeast has an opportunity to rise, because salt apparently helps to stop yeast from working as well as it normally would. So there's hopefully a little helpful tip. Then I went ahead and set that aside to rise. I went ahead and started on the flour that I'm going to coat my chicken in. I added a little bit of seasoning salt to the flour just to help season and salt that chicken so that it would be more flavorful, and mixed that all around. And then I took a pan and added a little bit of oil. As I said, we're not using a lot of the oil in this recipe, in all of the recipes, just because we do have the margarine, and I'm trying to rely more heavily on the oils and margarines that I include in the grocery budget price, just because I know they can really add up. The prices of the butter and oils can really add up. So we just kind of coated our chicken with this. This isn't going to be like a southern fried chicken. This is literally just a little extra flavor and it's going to add a little bit of crisp to our chicken. I heated up the oil in the pan and took the chicken tenders out and stuck them in the pan. We're doing one chicken tender per sandwich, and if it looks a little small, that's because it is a little bit smaller, but when you cut it up into slices, it does spread out, and you'll see it coats the bun pretty nicely and fills the sandwich. and we're gonna have plenty of other things that we're putting on the sandwich to help make it a more complete meal than just one little chicken tender would be. I went ahead and flipped my chicken once it started to get a little bit golden, and then I checked on my bread to see how it was working. This is the bread without the carrots, and this is the bread with the carrots. I felt like the bread with the carrots is slightly more risen, but it might just be my imagination. We'll see. But I then went ahead and took off 2 1/4 cup balls from the both of these bread loaves, and then I rolled them into long breadstick shapes. Now the breadsticks are going to be served with our next meal, but I figured I would go ahead and make them now with this current meal. Then I took the rounds that were left and kind of flattened them out a little bit because I wanted to make a nice bun shape. I went ahead and set them aside just to rise a little bit longer for a second rise time. I should have let them rise longer than I did, but they turned out pretty delicious, and I also preheated the oven to 350 degrees. Then I took the remaining flour and the seasoned salt mixture that I had left over from the chicken. I sliced 2 thick slices off of my red onion, and then just kind of flipped those onion rounds in that flour and salt mixture and stuck them into my hot oil. Now, of course, you could do the onion rounds first and do your chicken after if you're afraid of cross-contamination. I knew that I was going to be cooking these onions thoroughly, so I didn't worry too much about them. But this is what my bread is looking like. I went ahead and, believe it or not, this is after baking, so as you can see, I didn't let it sit and rise as long as I should have, so they're still a little bit firmer than I probably could have ended up with as a result for these breadsticks. I did go ahead and spread some margarine on all of the different breads that I had baked, and then added a little bit of garlic powder onto the breadsticks to make them into garlic breadsticks. And I put a little bit of oregano on top of my buns as well, just to give a little pizzazz to them. I then turned my oven on to broil on high and watched those buns like a hawk, just because I wanted them to have a little more color than they had on them, and I didn't want them to burn though. So I just watched them very carefully and let them brown a little bit. As you can see, this is our finished result. This is the recipe with the carrot inside. You can see it rose fairly nicely. It would have risen even more had I been less impatient and let them rise the time they were supposed to, but both turned out about the same, which is the surprising result for me, because I thought for sure after seeing how the yeast had risen with the carrot bread that it would have risen much more than the other bread, but honestly they both ended up about the same. I probably still would use the carrots next time and just see if I let them sit and rise longer, if for some reason it would. Plus, sticking a little bit of carrot in your bread is adding a little bit of extra veggie where you wouldn't normally find extra veggie. Now I'm going to be making these carrot coins, which if you like sweet potato fries, then this was very close to a sweet potato fry without being a sweet potato. I went ahead and melted in some butter and then added my carrots in. I made sure that that pan was hot, so that way those carrots really did brown and crisp up. And then I added a little bit of oregano and a little bit of salt as well, and pepper as well. And these turned out so good. Like, I would make them again and again. I haven't made carrots in this way before, and I was very impressed. I definitely want to do that again. Next, I took each of my chicken tenders, 2 of them, and I chopped them up, as you saw, into little slices. And then I got to work on this is going to be sort of a sauce, or at least a source of wetness on the bun, because we don't have all the ingredients included for making like some kind of a mayonnaise sauce or something like that. It doesn't really need that as well if you're wanting to keep it on the light side and a little bit healthy. So I'm just using this spinach as sort of a source of added juice and wetness to the burger. I went ahead and plated up my coined carrots, and as you saw with the spinach, I just added in a little bit of seasoned salt, and it didn't need anything too crazy special in order to make it really flavorful and delicious. Plus, it looks really pretty as well. I added on that spinach bed on top of my bun as the base, and then I added on my slices of chicken. I used 1 chicken tender per chicken breast, and that 3rd chicken tender you saw in the pan earlier is going to be used in our next recipe. So our next recipe is going to be lower on the protein side, but still a lot of food. And then I put the lid on, forgetting that I had made the little rounds, what are they called? Onion ring rounds. And I remembered, thankfully, and I'm thankful I did, because this really made the burgers. It was so good on these burgers. Just a little bit of sweet with the saltiness on the chicken, and then that bed of spinach was so good. And those carrot rounds, man, I wished I had made a lot more of those because they were so good. This was very filling, actually. I only ate about half of mine, and then I ended up eating it for a later meal as well, and it reheated fairly well. I was impressed. Next, we're going to be making this chicken gnocchi soup, and I went ahead and started out with a little bit of a start for a roux. I added a little bit of that margarine into the pan, then my onions, which started to turn translucent and caramelize, and then I added in 2 tablespoons of flour to soak up all that butter and to help thicken the soup later on. I then stirred it all around, and you'll see that it really does soak up all that butter and really starts to thicken up. Now, this was supposed to mimic a little bit the Olive Garden soup. If you've been to Olive Garden and had their gnocchi soup, it's one of my favorite soups that I've ever had, and I really enjoy it. So I decided I was going to make that, but I was going to make it kind of a dairy-free version because we don't have the half and half or the cream that we would normally add in to mimic that soup perfectly. So I went ahead and added in my water, let that heat up a little bit, then added in my gnocchi. Then I chopped up that chicken into smaller pieces and added that into the pan, and then added 2 bouillon cubes as well, and added in my shredded carrots and my spinach too. Now, if you are reheating the soup the next day, you might need to add another cup of water and a little bit, maybe 1 more bouillon cube into the soup, just because the gnocchi, while it's sitting overnight, will soak up a lot of that extra broth in the soup. And if you want a lot of broth in your soup, you might want to add a little more the next day. We did reheat this the next day, and it was delicious just the next day as well. If you do have some cream, you can add a little bit of cream or half and half to it as well if you like a richer soup. Then I added in a little bit of salt and pepper, a little bit of garlic powder as well, and just continue to stir that around. I started seeing my gnocchi popping up to the surface, which means that they are done. I added a touch of oregano on top of that soup, as well as a little bit of the shredded carrots just for a garnish, and added a little bit of oregano on top of my breadsticks as well. So we've got some garlic breadsticks on the side, and then my soup right here is perfectly delicious and piping hot. My husband commented that he was so impressed with this meal. It was really filling and delicious, and just really flavorful and pretty to look at the same time. If you or your family are on a tight budget right now, I hope these meals help and that you enjoy them as much as we did. Thank you all for watching today. I hope to see you all in the next one.